I want to start, with our webinar today. I'm going to share my screen. And okay, so thank you for being here. We're transmitting live from our headquarters in Monterrey, Mexico. We are School of Change, and we've been coming to Miami, on a monthly basis, giving free workshops that are a bit of a sample of what we do in School of Change. And we've had we've met great people through this strategy. And basically what we're doing now, we're complementing that with webinars. We've been doing that both in the US and in Mexico and Latin America. And so this is a webinar that we're offering for Miami for the first time. Okay, so what we do in School of Change is we empower professionals through lifelong learning. So we all know that the world's moving faster, and unfortunately academia cannot keep up with the pace of how fast the world moves. So there's a gap between what you can learn at a traditional, through traditional formal learning, and what you need to learn in order to cope with the speed at which things are moving. So today we're going to talk about how to design organizations. And so we've been thinking about this for many years, and this is something that I've been chewing on actually for a while. And I've realized as I've become an entrepreneur and I've worked on medium-sized companies that there are different moments that we go through in this life cycle of developing something new and turning it into something that grows and becomes profitable and stuff. But there's a moment where you need to work on your value proposition, and you need to find your product market fit and everything. But there's a moment once you've done that, then everyone wants to grow. We want to hack growth, and we want to get to bigger places. But we forget that in order to do that, we actually have to design an organization. And there's very little, I think, information literacy on that. So before we go from startup to high growth, we need to create a system, because otherwise we're just going to get stuck. Right? So we need to get unstuck. And actually, I found a book. I'm not sure if any of you is familiar with. This was a while ago. This was back in 2006. And I was waiting for my wife, at a mall. She was shopping, and I found a bookstore, and I went into it, and I found this book called Unstuck. It's a very visual, very simple book, but that showed me a framework that it's actually been very helpful for me to think about how organizations work. So there are 6 different, let's say, symptoms that we face, in the process of becoming an organization that I'm going to share with you. And you've probably seen or experienced yourselves. So, for example, it's typical that once we hit a specific moment in the life cycle of our organization, that people start becoming demotivated, and we don't know exactly what we're doing, why we're doing what we're doing, and the work feels just like work, and there is no sense of belonging. So that's one thing that I'm sure we've all seen. Another one is, I like to call this like disoriented. So there's a lot of opportunities, there's a lot of things to get done, we want to do everything, we want to capture every opportunity that comes our way, but we don't have a compass that helps us know which of those opportunities are right for us and which aren't. And that actually makes us spread ourselves thin and don't have enough resources and focus to do anything right. Another symptom that we've seen, and I'm sure you've experienced, is we're overwhelmed, especially if we are a startup or if we're coping with reinvention. Being overwhelmed is very, very easy. And sometimes our team doesn't know exactly, what's the next step to be taken. Everyone has a lot of work, too much work, a lot of pieces moving. We don't have enough time nor personal, or people to deal with everything. The fourth one is feeling devaluated. I think this one is super common, but we don't necessarily, realize how important it is. So sometimes, we don't know exactly what it means to be successful. So the expectations of the work and the results that everyone needs to deliver are not clear. So, and even when we're probably achieving great stuff, it doesn't get recognized, and it doesn't get celebrated, and it doesn't get rewarded. So people are start feeling like, they are not being valued. Then a fifth one is just being burnt out. I think that it's very common around organizations that are changing or starting out that there's a moment in time where everything is too busy fighting each other instead of fighting the competition or fighting, for the preferences of our customers. And finally, a sixth one, I call it alone together. So we used to be a very united group, and eventually this is replaced by a identity crisis, and we're less than the sum of our parts. So these are typical things that happens when we're evolving from being a startup to becoming a young growth organization. And it's important we go through that before we embark ourselves in a high growth, scaling our business. So basically what we're doing is we're just reacting. And reacting, I think it's very rewarding. I'm not sure whether you've thought about this. It's rewarding because it makes us feel useful. It makes us feel relevant. It makes us feel like we have a purpose. So it's typical that for leaders to say, I'm relevant, I'm important, I'm doing a good job, because there's a lot of people knocking on my door saying, hey, Michael, I need help with this, I need help with that. And and the problem is we don't deal with the root cause of things, right? So there are 6 variables that I think are composes an organization, and actually this is part of the framework that I learned from this book Unstuck. So one of them, it's important and we know about it, it's the purpose. A second one is the strategy. A third one is processes and tools. A fourth one is metrics and rewards. A fifth one is people and structure, and the sixth one is culture. So I'm going to talk about how to deal with each and every one of these. We have more expertise in some of them and less expertise in some of them. So I'm going to talk in more depth regarding some of them. So basically, okay. So let's start explaining why each of those symptoms happen, using this framework. So sometimes we're just demotivated. We're not motivated because when our organization doesn't have a purpose that it's clear, a purpose gives us the clarity to act. But it also gives us the resilience, to deal with the hardships that are typical and important when we're dealing with growth. So not having a clear purpose, sometimes it makes work feel like a lot of work, and that's not good, right? So what do we need to do in order to deal with this? Well, we need to realize, I believe that purpose in an organization, it's not about mission. And it has to do a little bit with our mission and that kind of thing. But I think that value propositions, the way you decide to approach what the market needs is the best way to define a purpose that it's actionable. Because a lot of purposes are just way, way, way too on the abstract side of things. So what we typically recommend, and one of the master classes that we offer is precisely focused on this issue, is we need to understand our clients, not just ask them what they want. That's not good enough. We need to see them in action and understand what are the tasks that they are performing, and each task that they're performing aims towards a gain or a benefit that they want to get, and some of the pains that they face along the way. So if you have that clarity, you can say, okay, this is a segment of people that I want to serve, and these are their aspirations, and these are the 3 benefits or pains that I want to address. And that's it, basically. Because when you have the clarity of those 3 problems, the expectations that you want to help them gain, the pains that you want to attenuate, then you can translate it to action. So this value proposition framework, actually, I'm going to expand on in another part of the framework. So, but there's also a situation where extremes are never good. So if you go to the extreme and you make the purpose so important and so large, but you don't make sure that every other part of your organization is aligned to the purpose, then you can have a clear and inspiring essence, but it's no good if we're not making sure that everything and every person and everything we do is perfectly aligned towards achieving that purpose, right? So that's one, purpose. Then the second one is pretty straightforward too, which is strategy. I mean, if you ask me, what is my strategy? What is your strategy? You only have to look up, at your budget. If you look at what you're spending in terms of people or resources or assets or whatever, that is your strategy in reality. You may have, a deck, you may have a lot of things, but if what you're executing on is your default strategy, whether it's formally defined or not. So how do we make sure that strategy is aligned towards fulfilling that purpose? I mean, first of all, that purpose needs to be stated in a way that it can be fulfilled, right? But second, it has to, right? Because otherwise, that's why we are lost. That's why we are disoriented sometimes, right? So the strategy, it's the formula, the smart formula that we go about towards achieving our purpose. So what needs to be done here is once you have a clear value prop with the clear pains and needs that you want to address, then you want to make sure that every feature and attribute of your product is aligned with each of those needs or pains, right? So we can make sure, when customers interact with us, they're getting, the tangible or intangible or aspirational value that they're hoping for, right? And we're making them think and feel and act the way we want to and the way they need to, right? So this matrix is actually very useful in order to, and for me, strategy, there's a lot of ways that, of defining strategy, but for me, it's the formula that you use in order to win. So it's the solution that you take to the market, right? That solution needs to be aligned with your purpose, which is with your customer. And another thing interesting is that strategy also needs to be thought of as a marketing strategy, not just a product or service strategy, as a go-to-market strategy. So you can be, you can be a product or service that has less performance or more performance. You can be more expensive or cheaper, and you can choose between these variables. So, for example, a lot of companies, without thinking, we just aim towards differentiation, which means that we want to be the solution with the most performance and the most expensive. That's typical, but I mean, it doesn't mean that that's what we should do, right? It depends on our positioning, strategic positioning. So some companies should do that. They should that this works only when you found a niche in the market that it's clearly underserved, which means that they have a very important need that nobody else is serving. Then you can be the one who has the most performance and who charges, the premium fee. But there's also a very interesting one, I think, on the opposite, on the lower right, which is called the disruptive strategy, which is actually being the cheapest and the one that offers the least performance. So let's say, for example, I think that the Google Suite, Google Documents and all that, it has less performance than, let's say, Microsoft Word or Microsoft Office, and it's cheaper. It's practically free. And that simplicity and that ease of use, it's enough for some people, and that it's a disruptive strategy because they start gaining market share very silently, and eventually you can develop your solution so it becomes more whole and more robust, and you can go up to the dominant strategy, which is you are the product that has the best performance, but you have enough volume in order to offer the best price. That's the second one, and then the third one is, I'd say I like to call this, when you have a market that is closed and captive, like in an airport. An airport offers you, for example, the worst kind of food, at a very expensive price. So there are situations, that allow you to do that, to be the product or service with the least performance and with the most, fee charging price. And then the fifth one is basically how to sustain. Maybe you're an established company and you just want your customers to have a little more for a little less. And that's not very interesting, but it happens. So again, having a strategy aligned to your purpose is super important, but you need to also, look beyond your industry, look beyond your business, because you may have everything aligned. You may be out of sync with the market. Maybe something changed. Maybe something happened. Maybe there's a disruption, and you're offering things that are no longer relevant, right? So again, it's important to have a purpose. It's important to have a strategy, but you need to be in sync with what's going on. So now we go to the third symptom. So sometimes we're just overwhelmed, right? And being overwhelmed, it's usually a consequence of not having processes and tools available and specifically designed to fulfill your purpose and your strategy, right? So when we feel overwhelmed, it generally means that we don't have the processes and the tools that we need. We know what to do, but we don't know how. So we're procrastinating. We never finish our projects. We spend too many hours doing things, and we're ready to call the ambulance, right? We've seen this, especially in startups. So what we need to do is we need to do a few things, towards the business, the back end of your business. You need to think of doing a little bit of value chain analysis and saying, what are the major activities involved in creating and delivering the kind of product or service that I'm taking to the market, and realizing that in that chain there are a lot of key activities that need to have tools and need to have processes, right? Because your employees need to know what to do, how to do it, and have what they need to in order to do it. That's on the back end of your business. But then in the front end comes the design of the experience of your customer. Also, especially when it comes to services, you need to think of what are the key activities that you need to do, from awareness to extending the experience at every stage of the experience. What are the specific things that we need to do in order to fulfill our purpose? So what are the key activities? What are the tools? What are the processes? It's not about creating tools and processes and becoming a process-centric organization, because that serves no one, right? And actually, if you go to the extremes, we become crazy about protocol. So the tools and the processes, happens to a lot of companies, become the center and the purpose itself. And then everything revolves around those. So it seems that we value more the processes and documenting them and the reports above everything else. So the structure and the processes, in reality, are the means that are defined in order to achieve our strategy and our purpose, not an end in itself. So we need to be aware of that. Then sometimes we feel devaluated. And the reason why we feel devaluated as part of an organization is because we don't have well-defined metrics and well-defined rewards. So when the members of an organization feel devaluated, it's because we don't have that. So a work well done, it's basically gone unnoticed, and that's not good. It's not sustainable over time, right? And basically what we suggest you do is to say, okay, what are the pillars of your value proposition? In our case, for example, in Novak, when we do consulting, this is about School of Change, but on the consulting side, our pillars are rigor, agility, being didactic, and having a vision. So how do we turn that into processes, right? How do we turn that into the tools and the processes that our team needs, right? Which is the second line. So there's a way of thinking about those things. And again, having the tools and having the metrics is important, but you can't make it the gravitational center of your organization. When you do that, you create a culture that becomes transactional. So everybody's doing things because they're getting something and not because they're aligned with a purpose and a strategy. Again, now we go for the fifth symptom. So being burnt out. So we feel burnt out when we have a series of problems related with people, their profile, training, organizational structure, etc. So we need to make sure that we have the right people for fulfilling our purpose. If we, for example, in our case, if we say we're about rigor, so how do we hire people that are rigorous, and what does that mean? For the structure. If we say that we are visionaries, or we need to have people who have vision, how do we select, train, and structure people so they can be visionaries, right? And also part of defining your personal and the organizational structure is defining where's the level of interaction between operations and management. The higher your level of interaction is, the more the more self-directed your team is, and the more agile your team is. For example, if you are defining what your team is doing on a daily basis, then they're going to be very dependent on you. So if you only define the method and you allow them to work, because you have the metrics and the rewards, of course, and you allow them to work on whatever they need to do on an everyday basis to get to those goals, then you're going to have a team that is much more self-directed and more agile. And you can go up to maybe they can define the priorities, if they become competent enough, or maybe they can help you define your purpose. So defining the line of interaction is important, right? So for example, and then you have to define, here's where I like to use the word mission. So a team in your organization needs to have a mission. And I mean a mission in terms of quest, not a mission in terms of abstract purpose. So basically, if our quest is to sell an X amount of money, then you need to define, okay, what are the objectives, right? How are you going to measure that? Also, you need to define what are the activities, what are the projects, content creation or promotional workshops, what are the team roles? But I think the more important part is defining how your team makes decisions. You need to give them rules of thumb. You need to empower them so they can decide for themselves. Because you can't make every decision yourself, because you become very, you feel important, but then you can't scale. Remember, we're doing this so we can scale. So, for example, if you have, if you run a consultancy business, you want to say to your teams, when we do workshops, the quality of the people is as important as the quantity of people. Don't bring me just people for the sake of bringing me people. Or, for example, when we are hiring clients, we want the profile of the client is more important than the amount of clients that we have, etc. So, or the willingness to pay is more important than what they ask for. RFP, that's a good one. So, for example, what we tell our BD teams is, a client may tell you that they want this and that, and they usually tell you that they want more than they can pay for. So, willingness to pay, what you think they're willing to pay, is more important than what they're asking for. So, those rules of thumb help team members make decisions on their own. And of course, they need to be structured differently if you're dealing with people on the operational side, or if you're dealing with people on the creative side of things, right? And again, if you go to extremes and you make your structure and the profile and the people the gravitational center of your organization, you're going to end up with a social club. You're going to end up with a place where everyone's happy, everyone belongs, but nothing gets done. Right? And finally, we go to the C word, which is culture, which is difficult, I know. So when we are alone together, alone in company, sometimes we feel when we don't have a culture, right? When every meeting seems like the first time that we work together. Sometimes new leaders emerge along the process, and we don't have a pattern of work that is successful or a rhythm that is well defined, right? So, for example, in some organizations that work with projects, this is the typical energy or rhythm that a project follows. Usually, at the beginning, people are not working too hard, and then the line starts to climb, and at the end, people are burned out because you need to make up for everything you didn't do. So, how do you establish a proper rhythm, right? How do you create certain rituals and stuff, that you can use so you can change the rhythm of how people work, right? So they can work hard enough every week, but understanding that people are human and Mondays are slow, it's normal. Fridays are slow, it's normal. But how to make sure that the other 3 days we have a lot of work done. Again, if you make culture, the gravitational center of your organization, you end up with a cult, right? And you get drunk on the Kool-Aid and don't get enough things done. So that is actually the model. That's the framework that I learned. This is, this is how I interpret it. This is how we use it. And I use this as an example so you guys can see this model and think of how you can use it in order to think about how to structure your organization. And I want to appreciate the time that you spent with us today. Thank you for being here on this Lunch and Learn, our first one in Miami. Next time, I'm going to make sure that our presentation in English works. When things are, we've been doing this very successfully in other places, but sometimes when you're dealing with different languages, stuff happens. So thank you for your patience in that regard, and I hope to see you soon. We're giving a workshop in Miami next week on Tuesday. You're gonna get an invitation. You probably already did. So have a great Friday, have a good weekend, and hopefully see you next time.